Welcome into the Stack Shack Sports Show. Today, we're going to go through all of the Notre Dame players drafted. It was a good draft for Notre Dame. It was a draft where they retained their top spot as the college with the most all-time NFL draft picks. They weren't the most in this draft. I think Michigan was way up there, given they just won a national championship. But they still had a pretty solid draft, had a lot of players picked, and then a few also after the draft quickly picked up in free agency. We're going to go through, and I'm going to talk about each player and how I think they fit in their new roles. The first player off the draft was at number 5, the highest Notre Dame draft pick in a very long time, offensive tackle Joe Alt. Now, this one was a bit surprising because he goes to the Chargers. Well, why? Not because Jim Harbaugh is there. Jim Harbaugh loves offensive linemen. He loves to run the ball. Go look at his teams at Stanford. Go look at his teams in the NFL his previous time in with the 49ers, a great running football team. Go look at his Michigan football team. He understands that to win at any level of football, if you dominate the trenches, defensive line, offensive line, you dominate the trenches, you're in good shape to win a lot of games no matter what level of football you're playing. NFL, college, high school, Pop Warner, it really doesn't matter. Dominate the trenches, win up front. Keep your quarterback safer than their quarterback, run the ball is a recipe for success. So he goes to the Chargers. Not a surprise that Harbaugh would want offensive linemen. What was a surprise is that he went with an offensive tackle in Joe Alt as the first pick of the draft for the Chargers when they already had a pretty darn good offensive tackle in Slater. So a little confusing. We'll see. Alt has always played left tackle. Probably not going to be the end of the world if he moves to right. I also previously, if you watched my video just covering the first round of the draft, we talked a little bit about this. I said maybe Slater said he wants to move to right tackle. We don't know what's going on in the building. Maybe there's been those discussions where Slater says, I want to move to right tackle. That means they need a left tackle. Or they're planning on moving Joe Alt to right tackle. I guess there's a slight chance they're thinking about just loading up on left tackles and maybe trading Slater for some extra pieces. Although they didn't do that in the draft, so it wasn't like they were looking for extra picks. So I really don't think that's likely. I guess it is possible, but that really doesn't make sense to me. To me, it's all about shoring up that offensive line. I think Alt will probably play right tackle, move to right tackle here in the NFL. Or, like I said, maybe Slater's in the house, in building, in that locker room, talked to Jim Harbaugh and said, hey, I'd really like to make the move to right tackle. That's very possible. And so that's why they bring up Joe Alt. I think he's a great player. PFF rates him as one of the best, if not the best, in almost every category of offensive lineman, run block, pass block, everything. Pretty impressive. Pretty impressive player. Maybe it's just a factor of get the best available guy and find a spot for him, right? Maybe move him to right tackle. So I think it's a good pick, but a little bit weird to see the Chargers take him. I expected him to go early in the first round, but maybe not to the Chargers just because they had Slater. And the next player picked was in the second round. Houston Texans pick up Blake Fisher. This is another good pickup. This is the other tackle, right tackle from Notre Dame. Great player, highly rated. We expected him to go not as high, obviously. Left tackle is more important than right tackle typically, and therefore goes higher. But good pick by the Texans. Keep C.J. Stroud safe. That's mission number one. It's why teams like the Bengals took multiple offensive linemen. You want to keep that franchise quarterback, that quarterback you think is really good. You want to keep him upright. And they definitely had some needs in Houston on that offensive line. So I think that was a big get for the Texans there in the second round. Then in the third round, Leafau, first defensive player from the Irish, going to the Dallas Cowboys. Now, we've seen them in Dallas pull some Notre Dame linebackers to have some success there, right? Jalen Smith previously. Had a lot of success there in Dallas for a few years there. So Leofau goes third round. He was a big riser, I feel like, this season, but also in his demonstration in the combine, in his pro day. He really started to rise up a lot of draft boards. I don't think he was really noted as being that high coming into this draft process, but he really grew. And I know, as somebody who watched every single Notre Dame game last year, he's pretty legit. I think he's a good third-round pick. Micah Parsons moving a little bit more towards the edge, right? I think there's an opportunity for Leofau to be a contributor. Definitely, I think, the most talented of the linebackers out of Notre Dame coming in this season. And somebody who often flashed on the field as that guy's a little different than I think everybody else on that defense. And that was a pretty good defense last year. So happy for him. I think the Cowboys got a good pick. I'm probably a little higher on Leofau than a lot of other people are. I would have been okay with him going in the second round. But third round, probably where he should go. If he slipped to the fourth, I probably would have been surprised. He is a solid linebacker, and I think that just adds depth to a Cowboys team. Cowboys overall in this draft did not make a lot of big moves. They just kind of made the basic moves, and we'll see what he can do. This is the other player that I think coming into the draft, people weren't really high on. Then in kind of the Senior Bowl and the Pro Day and the Combine, started to really rise, especially at the Senior Bowl. A lot of eyes talking about how well Cam Hart was playing. He slips to the fifth round, and I say slipped because I thought he would probably go maybe third or fourth, probably fourth. I think the Chargers got a bit of a steal here. Harbaugh, going back to this Notre Dame connection, if you look at Harbaugh's staff, I think it's very interesting. Go look up the staffers. He brought in quite a few ex-Notre Dame coaches to his staff in Los Angeles, and I think they were in their coach's ear, in their head coach's ear, really kind of pushing towards the Notre Dame players. He's a converted wide receiver, had a bunch of shoulder surgeries. It's very possible that that's playing a major factor. The shoulder surgery is not the converted wide receiver. The converted wide receiver is why he's got great hands, good body control. I think he's a very solid player. Not graded as the highest rated, cornerback. But I think when you see him on the field, you see what he did. And that Notre Dame, corners, they really kind of let Morrison, who's most people would probably say is the better of the two corners. But last season, Hart and Morrison really locked down in the pass game some legit wide receivers. I mean, we're talking, go look at Marvin Harrison Jr.'s numbers, and he went as the best wide receiver in this draft. Look at his numbers when faced up against Cam Hart and Morrison. They're not that great. And he wasn't the only top-rated wide receiver to struggle a bit against these two DBs. Now, I guess you can say, yeah, that's mostly Morrison. Morrison is the cover guy who was mostly tasked with locking down Marvin Harrison Jr., but Cam Hart's out there, too, taking the other side of the field away from quarterbacks. I think he's a really, really solid player, and I think he's a bit of a steal in round 5. I'll be honest. I would have had him probably going in the 4th round. But looking forward to hopefully seeing him get some chances, see what he does in the NFL. I'm high on Cam Hart, though. Then we had Bertrand go. Now, I think they've got a misprint here. It's not the 8th round. I believe this was the 5th round. Only a few picks later after Cam Hart goes, J.D. Bertrand goes to the Atlanta Falcons. I think this was somewhat surprising to a lot of people. Nothing against Bertrand. Loved him at Notre Dame, a longtime captain, leading the team in tackles in a lot of cases. Good player, but I think most people saw Bertrand as a great, solid college player, maybe not athletically capable of playing at a super high level in the NFL. I would have expected him to be a 6th, 7th round, maybe just a free agent kind of pickup. But he goes, I believe, in the 5th round, 143rd overall, to the Atlanta Falcons. What he does bring is good blitzing ability. He's kind of a solid player to bring in on special teams to give you that edge, and then also in some very specific blitz packages I could see. The other thing is, this guy is super smart. When you talk about everybody in the draft and you hear scouts talk about Bertrand, they all talk about this preparation, instinctive play, and rugged determination. I think that sums it up beautifully. His preparation, the way he's able to read offenses, he is the epitome of someone that you can bring in quickly and say, hey, you're a rookie, but he's going to pick up and instantly add depth to your linebackers, right? Maybe not the most athletically gifted, but you don't have to worry about him filling the wrong gap, right? You don't have to worry about him taking a year or two to get up to speed on how the defense is run. This guy's an academic All-American, was a finalist for the academic Heisman Trophy. He's the kind of guy you can just instantly slot in a couple of key situations, and he's going to know what he needs to do. So, solid player. I think he was probably taken a little bit too high. But if the Falcons are looking just for someone to add some depth, what better way to grab this player than J.D. Bertrand? And a few picks later, Aundre Eese finally goes off the board. Goes to the Denver Broncos. Now, I think this was actually the perfect kind of place for Eese to go. You know, you look at where these teams are going. Bertrand going to the Falcons, okay. I think Cam Hart going to the Chargers is a great fit. Leafau going to the Cowboys, I'm not sure if it's the best fit, but I think he can have some significant success there, especially as Parsons moves more and more into kind of an edge rusher position rather than playing a true linebacker position. Obviously, the 1st and 2nd round picks go into, I think, pretty solid places. Joe Alt may be a little tough because he might have to switch positions. So that's obviously a little bit disappointing maybe for him if he does indeed have to do that. But Eese, a player who was wildly productive in his career at Notre Dame, tons of yards, tons of touchdowns, big bruising back. He just didn't have a good 40 time. And, you know, to be fair, look at his forced missed tackles. He's definitely athletic. Just go watch him jump over people. So it's kind of interesting. We talk pad speed versus non-pad speed. And this is a guy who in pads seemed fast enough in some ways. But I think he ends up actually in a really great place in Denver. A place where you've got Sean Payton kind of rebuilding this offense. They have some weapons. They're not a bad team, right? It's not like they're expecting Eese to carry a huge workload. He's going to be able to come in key situations, short yardage situations, with Bo Nix potentially being the quarterback. I know they've got a few quarterbacks there, but I think we're all thinking Bo Nix, given how high they took him and given how quote-unquote Drew Brees-like he is as far as being almost a point guard in the backfield as the quarterback. Aundre Eese, I think, is going to be productive. It's never a bad idea, I don't think, in this day and age in football to have multiple running backs. I think he's definitely going to have an opportunity to play. You know, he goes in the 5th round, okay, but he'll have a chance to play. He'll have a chance to get some moments, and I think for who he is as a player and what the Denver Broncos are going to be able to use him for, I trust Sean Payton to find unique and good ways to use Aundre Eese. So I think he actually goes to a good spot for him to have some success and maybe have a bit of a career. And we get to the 7th round, and finally Jean-Baptiste goes. He goes to the Washington Commanders. They definitely had a bit of a need for some pass rushing help after, trading away some of that defensive line. But I really think this was a good pick by Washington. I think Jean-Baptiste, yes, he was going to go late. I didn't expect him to, go in the first 5 rounds. I probably would have expected him to maybe go 5 or 6. But he's a pass rush specialist. And so that's, not as much of a Swiss Army knife type player as maybe you would want in those earlier rounds. And I can understand that. But to get him in the 7th round, the thing I like about Baptiste is not even necessarily anything about his measurables, although he does have great measurables. He's a dangerous pass rusher, and he actually was graded fairly well against the run once he came over to Notre Dame. Led the team with 5 sacks last season. And the thing that I love about him is not even the numbers of, he had 5 sacks, 36 tackles, he's got an 85.4 grade from PFF against the run. It's that if you turn on the tape and you go to the biggest games and the biggest moments from last season for Notre Dame, you know who you're going to see making plays in those moments? It's this guy. He was the one in some very key situations when we said, man, we need a sack right now. We need a big defensive stop. We need a big defensive play. This guy's getting it done. He flashed many times at the right time. Now, would I like to see a little more consistent production? Sure. But in big moments, in big games, when you needed somebody to win a one-on-one matchup and go get the quarterback or get off his block and stuff that running back, this was your guy. He flashes so often. You can go look at even the game they lost, Ohio State, because of a defensive mishap by giving up that touchdown. If you watch that whole drive, he's the one that makes some very big plays. Very big plays in key moments. And he's a player that had a lot of usage. He was on the field a ton. And still had that motor to keep going. So I think this was a great pickup. I think an underrated pickup. Expect to see him make some big plays in big moments. That's the kind of player that he is. Then, that was the end of the draft for Notre Dame. Sam Hartman goes and joins Baptiste there with Washington. Sam Hartman came to Notre Dame this season, in this past year, to demonstrate and get some experience in a pro-style offense, right? He had set some records and put up huge numbers at Wake Forest in their kind of RPO-style offense. And he came to Notre Dame to demonstrate, hey, I can play, and really just to get some experience playing in a pro-style offense, as well as obviously try and demonstrate why Notre Dame was, a bit more of a contender, right? Especially, hopefully, with him at quarterback. Now, unfortunately for Hartman, this season did not go quite as expected. I would make an argument that it's not all his fault. Obviously, I think the offensive coordinator last season was not great. Most people would probably say that. And he's no longer with Notre Dame, although he got a head coaching job at a smaller school. And that's a bit unfortunate for Hartman to have to deal with a first-time offensive coordinator. Offense was really good in moments and really bad in other moments. Very inconsistent offense. But I do think Sam Hartman struggled a little bit in the pro-style offense. Now, having a year under his belt might give him a better opportunity to go to Washington. And for Washington, they took Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels is going to be the starter. So Sam Hartman can come in as a backup, compete for that backup job. I think he's probably capable of it. He just doesn't quite have the arm strength, I don't think, to be a big-time quarterback. But if you're Washington, you definitely want to have somebody who's a legit backup. Because Jaden Daniels is very athletic, but he's a little more on the slender side, and running quarterbacks just go around the league. It's more common to get hurt when you're running around. So you definitely want to have a solid backup. And I'm always of the belief that you should bring in extra quarterbacks. Not because you necessarily expect them all to turn into your new starter, but even just as trade assets. I mean, the most iconic one is go look at what the Packers got for Matt Flynn. Dude came in one game when Aaron was hurt, threw 4 touchdowns, and they got a bunch of picks for him. Quarterback is the most sought-after position in the NFL. It is. And it's also probably the most scarce, as far as you can't really just go find a bunch of quarterbacks that you want. Receivers are starting to find out that they're not scarce. There's a lot of receivers out there that are pretty solid. Quarterback is still very scarce, and to have an extra quarterback in the building, if you can develop them in to somebody, I mean, we're talking, it's a free agent. You get a 5th or a 6th round draft pick for Sam Hartman in a couple of years because he looks good in a few preseason games. That's a good signing. That's a good deal. You got a lot of value out of Hartman. You got a pick. You didn't have to use a pick on him, right? So I'm a big fan of that. Do I think he's going to have a great NFL career? I think he's going to be a backup for a while and probably not for super long. But he's young and doesn't really have a big injury history. Why not take a flyer on him if you're the Commanders? I can totally get behind that. And Thomas Harper goes to the Chargers. What the heck? That's 3. Count them, 3 Notre Dame players going to the Chargers. Again, like I said, there's some ex-Notre Dame coaches on that staff. They were definitely pushing them. Thomas Harper, listed as a DB, played safety, came from Oklahoma State, and he's a great tackler, right? Great tackler. Had some issues with injuries, obviously, but seems to be holding up much better now. He's a good player. Add a little depth. Bring him into camp. Why not? We'll see if he can flash. He didn't get used a ton at Notre Dame. He was a kind of a slot DB specialist in certain situations. So we'll see what he can do. Hopefully he'll do well. And then Spencer Schrader goes to the Indianapolis Colts. They pick up the kicker. He really does have a cannon of a leg, right? They say blessed with one of the strongest right legs at the college level. This dude can kick the ball super, super far. He was a former international soccer hopeful. He just misses a lot of kicks. He's a smart kid, right? Dabbles in Austrian economics, real estate investment, nonprofit. Do I think he's going to be great at the NFL level? Probably not. But he has the leg to be. He's just got to get his accuracy. So why not? Finding a good kicker, somebody who can make a 60-yard field goal, that's really, really rare. Now, obviously, kickers don't get as much playing time as quarterbacks, so, you know, quarterback's more valuable. But if you have somebody who can consistently make the big, long kicks, which Schrader has the leg for it, just doesn't have the accuracy. Maybe they can work on accuracy. Maybe it's a situation where, hey, lock it in. Just sit here all off season making kicks, get good at it. Maybe practice makes perfect for him and he becomes an NFL kicker. I don't know. I think it's worth a shot. And that rounds out all the players so far signed and drafted from last year's Notre Dame team. It was a good draft for them. I mean, lots of people going. Joe Alt going 5th overall. It's good for recruiting. It's good for Notre Dame. I think they did a good job with Marcus Freeman being at the draft. That dude is everywhere. Like, I want to, can we get a Marcus Freeman tracker? Like, my dude feels like he's in 8 places at once. He's recruiting, he's at the draft, he's at this camp, he's at that camp, he's coaching spring ball. My dude is all over the place. Very exciting if you're a Notre Dame fan to see. It feels like, the last couple years it started to come back of Notre Dame football players getting drafted. It feels like there was a dead period there for a little while where nobody was really going in the draft. Maybe the tight ends, right? But outside of that, we had Eifert and Rudolph and those guys. Other than that, there wasn't a lot of Notre Dame players getting picked up. Obviously, it's good. Offensive line U is here to stay. Notre Dame just keeps churning them out. One of the biggest questions for Notre Dame this season is going to be how do they replace both tackles in Alt and in Fiser. We will have to see. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of these locations. Who do you think of these Notre Dame players is going to have the best NFL career? Let me know in the comments down below, and we'll see you tomorrow.